Matt S asks how to balance schedule, strength training, sprint training on top of building aerobic capacity. Great question, Matt. And that's essentially what we do here at Rugby Muscle. Is that's the name of the game, and that's like if if I was to like describe the real problem with particularly amateur, but all rugby specific strength and conditioning, I would say it is that question. It's balancing and schedule, and particularly when we're talking about amateur, then we're talking about the schedule as well, right? Strength training, sprint training, and aerobic work. Like you've got to figure out how to fit all those pieces in together. And the difficult thing with this, as you probably know by asking this question, is that you can't just do them all back to back to back and expect to get good results. Because if you're going to do quality speed work, especially, you need to be fresh to do those. If you're going to recover from your strength training, you need to like have some rest the next day. If you're going to build aerobic capacity, you need time. You can't just do all of this stuff and expect to get better at all of this stuff, because you're just going to push yourself into the ground with a huge amount of fatigue. So we don't do that. We don't do that at all here at Rugby Muscle. We firstly we figure out our priorities. So I think we've done videos on this before, but let me give you the cliff notes. First and foremost, you've got to figure out your schedule, right? That's the most important thing, right? If you don't have your schedule at hand, then you what are we doing here? We're just talking theoretics. So you have to figure out your personal schedule for your week. That's absolutely vital if you're going to do this stuff right. Once you figured out your schedule, so how many times you can train a week, okay, now we're going to look into our priorities, right? What is your number one thing that you need to do? Make sure that gets scheduled in. So is it that you are so many rugby players are already definitely at least strong enough. Of course, we can always be stronger, but they're strong enough. But where they lack is their aerobic capacity, their fitness, their ability to perform for 80 minutes. And so many rugby players could do with a period of at least a couple months where strength isn't the priority. It's still done once a week, maybe twice a week, but the priority becomes, and actually twice a week you can still make huge improvements. But the priority becomes your aerobic capacity, your aerobic work. Then that goes in first, and then you figure out, okay, I'm going to get my my weight training on top of that. And then we're looking at sprint training, and we're making sure that we're not doing anything overly fatiguing before sprint training day. The other thing that we've got to consider here is your rugby training. Particularly, obviously, if you're in season, that's something we've got to consider. If you're in off season, it's not as big of a consideration, but we do have to figure out your rugby training. So what I like to do is incorporate you've got all these different factors now. Now you've actually got like a slate to work with, right? You've got a schedule where, okay, now I've got my high fatigue sessions, I've got my low fatigue sessions, your aerobic work, and I've got the time that I can fit this all in. You can't do it all. You have to accept that. You have to accept that there's always going to be more work that you could theoretically do, and that's okay because you're still going to make improvements. And therefore, it's impossible to give you, Matt, your specific schedule, but that's how you would go about creating your own schedule. The only other things I would add to consider is you could do one strength training session before a sprint day, potentially. I've changed my mind on this. Usually I would say sprint training must be done completely fresh. It must be done without any weight training the day before. It must be done without any high intensity training the day before at all. You can only maybe do some aerobic work, otherwise it could be completely rested before sprint training. The reality is that makes sprint training practically impossible for a lot of people. It also means that you don't get to take advantage of the Tuesday rugby session where you're already at a field. I like to do the Tuesday session because most in-season athletes, particularly rugby players, are doing Tuesday, Thursday rugby sessions throughout the week. So if you're already going to field on a Tuesday, then I like to do that sprint training on that Tuesday. Thursday's a little bit too close. You then having to sacrifice a lot of work throughout the week in order to get that session in. But Thursday could be an option as well. I just like to do it. I like to do a strength training session on the Mondays, a sprint session on the Tuesday if you need it. And then Wednesday you can rest before doing a weight session on Thursday. And then you've got another rest day before your game on Saturday. That schedule is probably the easiest and simplest way you can do in season. But there is a big thing I've missed here, which is the aerobic training. Luckily, the aerobic training almost goes hand in hand with rest because it is so low fatiguing. And it's particularly if you're just doing stuff like, elliptical, or if you're, that's it, elliptical or bike, it's really not fatiguing and you'll be fine. Even if you're good enough at running slow enough, which most people aren't, so that's something to bear in mind, you're going to be fine to do low intensity zone 2 aerobic work on any of those other days that I've called rest days. Yes, you can do a low intensity zone 2 training session the day before a rugby game and you would be absolutely fine. You can do it between 2 heavy strength training sessions. You're going to be absolutely fine. You could do it the day after a rugby game and you'd be absolutely fine. In fact, they do this quite often. And what do they call it? They call it recovery sessions. That's not the way I see it, because you're not really enhancing recovery. Yes, you're getting a little bit of blood flow work, but really what you're doing is you're working on your aerobic system. So that's how I would do it. If it depends on your schedule, because if you're someone that has 2 hours on a Monday but has no time on the Tuesday, or you'd have to approach this differently. You'd have to do your aerobics. You could easily do your aerobic work before or after your weight session. You could also do your sprints before your weight session. You could also just do you could do an aerobic work on Monday, just to shake off the cobwebs. And if you had time, you could weight train in the morning on Tuesday and then do your sprints before your rugby session on Tuesday as well, and then take all of Wednesday off to recover from that real intense session, or do aerobic work. So many different ways to plan this, but I would just make sure that you're not planning high fatigue sessions back to back to back. You're prioritizing that aerobic work, so you're not seeing that as a rest day and sacking it off time and time again, which is what most people do. You're prioritizing what your week at, and you're going through that schedule, or you're being realistic with your schedule as how far as it comes to doing, as it fits you and your life, right? Really bloody important. Final thing I'd mention on this, I do have something coming out that will really focus on this, and it will be for free. So you'll get access to this if you're on the newsletter at rugby-muscle.com. It is something that I do think is probably the biggest struggle for rugby players is finding the time to work on all of this stuff. So there'll be a 2-week program coming out, just introducing you to the rugby muscle method and how I plan on doing things and how you can make it fit your life. So yeah, give that a go.